So straight from Denmark. So what happens when we start an agile journey?
Yeah, I have good news for you. Now's the time for us to become agile and embark on our agile journey.
We've been asking for this for years. What has changed?
I've managed to convince executive management that once we become agile, we can finally start delivering the projects within the initial agreed budget, timeline, and scope.
So why is that funny? Well, we don't go agile to get better at delivering the iron project triangle, right? We typically do it to add more value, get more customer satisfaction, not to get better at delivering projects within the constraints that are never going to hold anyways. So my name is Luxshan. I have a professional mission in life. It is to expose what happens when all this agile stuff, right, that we're talking about all the day today, when that meets reality, what happens and what fails and what can we learn from it. So I'm the writer, the agile nerd in our little thing we got going here. And I have a real job as well here in Denmark, where I work as an enterprise agile coach at the financial services company. We have around 117 teams, so a lot of work there. So I've held different agile roles in different types of companies. Latest at Vestas, where we made wind turbines and introduced some safe and try to get out of safe as well, stuff like that. Yes, educational background as a software engineer back in 2010. And who are you, Mikkel?
Yeah, my name is Mikkel, and my professional mission in life is to cut through the bullshit. And you certainly meet a lot of bullshit when you've been in the business for 20 plus years, as I have. So I'm the guy who draws the cartoons and puts all the fancy colors on our bobbleheads. I work as a user experience specialist at Vestas, world's #1 supplier of power plants, sustainable wind power plants. And as I said, I've been working with user experience for 20 plus years. I have a background in architecture, believe it or not. So real brick and building architecture, and not all this fancy or not so fancy PowerPoint architecture that you meet a lot in the computer software business.
Okay.
Yeah, and together with Luxshan, as we said, we are Comic Agilé.
Yeah, so we're here not because of our real jobs, but because of what we do in our spare time. And that's basically making comic strips and trying to educate the world and improving agile practices around the world. We have a book we published, we do talks, and we have some merchandise as well. So we're very proud that we have 42,000 followers on LinkedIn, hardworking, full-time professional followers. And as you all know, that equals around 42 million teenagers on TikTok, right? So hypothetically, this was what we would have. We published a book, and I guess when you publish a book, people think you're really smart, and you get invited to all sort of conferences and all this stuff. And I guess that's why we're here.
It is.
And let me just ask once more, could you please unmute the crowd, unmute the hall sound, please? Yeah. So today's theme in the conference is made of Agile, right? So we're going to hear about a lot of successful companies. We're going to tell their stories, the war stories as well, but the successful stories of what do they do to make Agile and DevOps work. What we're going to do today is going to flip it around a bit. So we want to talk about when it doesn't work, right? So our message today, what is that, Mikkel?
Yeah, our message today is that the key to articulating what goes wrong, or it is to articulate what goes wrong, so we can learn from our mistakes. And that's what we do. So we make fun of whatever goes wrong.
So if you want a successful Agile transformation, we want you to do more in talking about the mistakes you make. You can talk about them, celebrate them. What we do is make comic strips about them, right? That's where the actual learning is. And what's more made of Agile than that, actually, right? So let's move into it.
So here's a manager.
Yeah.
And he bought some t-shirts, Scrum t-shirts. And as you can see, one size fits all, right?
Yeah. They want to go Agile. We saw why they want to go Agile a couple of strips ago, right? But the first thing they do, what is that?
Well, the first thing we do is that we hire some external consultants.
And they know too little and are too expensive.
They are.
Yeah.
So these guys, they're known as Agile BS, and it stands for Agile Business Solutions.
Yeah.
And we are with the consultancy firm Agile BS, and here's our plan for your Agile transformation. First, to really understand your organization, we'll observe and analyze your department for some time. Based on the analysis, we'll design and describe the transformation effort. Following, we'll implement the new Agile processes.
Lastly, we'll test how the transformation works and integrate it with current processes across the organization. We expect the full transformation to take a couple of years.
Yeah, so why is this not an all right process?
Well, it could be, but taking a waterfall approach to an Agile transformation is just crazy, right? It's really like a double standards move to do this. So what you should do instead is, of course, identify the slice in your organization where you can actually test out whether Agile is the right thing for you. So it could be a value stream or a product line or just a single product, and the few teams that actually can work on that product, and then make it Agile all the way from the top to the bottom, all the way from how you're organized, how your funding works, and all the way into how you communicate with customers and end users, right? So instead of going big bang and just transforming 100 teams into working with Scrum or Kanban, take the few teams that work with a specific product and make the Agile way of working work for them, and then share it organically, right? Grow it organically. So another thing that happens, seen from a manager's view, is that they're told to have to make all the teams self-managing, to empower them, right? So the consultants say something like this: besides higher customer satisfaction, going Agile generally also increases employee engagement.
Yes, becoming part of self-managing teams is what really makes a difference.
And you can see the PowerPoint, right? So it must be true. The developers then say, well, we just want to code.
Just tell us what to do and we'll figure out how.
No, you're empowered and self-managing now.
You can't waste your time coding. Yeah, and as a developer sort of type, I've been embedded a lot with these developers, right? I feel there's so much to do in these processes. Yeah. We have dailies and plannings and groomings again and again. It seems like we really never have time to work. So what's going wrong?
Well, what typically goes wrong is that you add a lot of Agile ceremonies on top of existing meetings. If you're coming from waterfall project-based world, then you keep having the different status meeting, reporting meetings, and all these type of meetings. So the idea is, if you have the Agile ceremonies, you can actually get rid of the others. But I know if you're surrounded by some sort of waterfall governance model, you still need to have all the other stuff, but don't add a lot of meetings on top of it. Remove some of your old meetings, unless you don't want the developers to actually have time to code.
Yeah. So speaking about meetings, this is a manager, right? And he has a plan.
He does.
He does.
And he's been told that that the teams are agile and self-managing and empowered. So let's see what happens in that case. Here we have a manager saying, "Come on, team, work faster."
Can I have a word with you? When we work agile, we don't pressure our teams to run faster. It's not sustainable, motivational, nor the management approach that we want.
Okay.
Instead, we want to deliver more value frequently to the customer.
Come on, team, add more value.
That a girl. Yeah. So where I sit, I see this a lot actually. Management always want us to work harder and faster and push more out of the door, right?
Yeah. But taking this Tayloristic old school approach to motivating your employees is not the right way to go, right? It should be motivating in itself to get feedback from the teams, from the customers, to see the customers become happy because of the stuff they deliver. But something you need for this to work, right? And it comes from the top is a word we all know, which is called psychological safety. Mm-hmm. So here's a consultant talking about psychological safety.
The lack of psychological safety is detrimental to a successful agile transformation. Therefore, dear managers, no one should be punished for errors or questions in the pursuit of continuous improvement or higher performance. So a little bit later,
the manager understands this, right? So I want you to know that it's totally fine to voice your opinions, whatever they are.
Okay, then I don't see how line management adds any value to our agile way of working.
Pack your things.
Yeah, well, that's not a great way to go, right?
So it seems that there isn't quite psychological safety after all. So what you could argue is that if you don't have psychological safety in your company, right, which means that, an environment where you can fail safely and you can make experiments and try new stuff, then how are you ever going to work agile, right? So psychological safety is a foundation for working agile. But it's okay to fail, uh, even with customers. You don't want to be told off by neither your boss nor the actual customers.
So is there any way of measuring if we're doing this agile or if we're good at it?
There are many ways. Here are some of the ways you might be able to relate to, but that you shouldn't do, that you should not do. So a successful indicator, number of teams involved in our scaled agile setup. No, that's not a successful indicator, because that means that you have a lot of dependencies and thus a lot of overhead to manage it. Look into descaling instead. The number of certified colleagues, well, that's just a theoretical exercise, right? That doesn't mean they can apply it in your context. The team's velocity comparison. First of all, the velocity of a team, like a sprint velocity, is only the team's business. It's for the PO and the team to forecast when they can deliver on their different plans and commitments. It's not for management to compare teams. Don't do that. The average number of teams that a Scrum Master can manage and have in their span, this is not a good indicator, right? There's a full-time job in being a Scrum Master, taking care of one team, because as soon as you fix some of the impediments and improve the team and coach them, there's more systemic stuff, organizational stuff you can look into while still driving the team. So this conversion between story points and hours, that's just a big no-no. Don't do that.
It's a big dream for management, right?
Yes, yeah. Don't do that. It's not compatible. And then predictability. So you could say there are many ways of measuring predictability, but are we really successful in working agile if we have a high predictability? There's kind of the opposite of agile, isn't it? So have a think about what that means for you. So how can we help management, Mikkel?
Yeah, we can understand management's actual reason for going agile.
Yeah, was it as the first slide indicated, was it just to get better at delivering projects within the same boundaries? Or is it for getting happier employees and customers? And what's the real reason?
Agree with management about what empowerment really means.
Yeah. So who should have the difficult talks in the team? Is it the Scrum Master? Is it like a line manager? Who can actually take the decision on prioritization? Is it the product owner? Is there a manager who actually has the final say?
And then clarify the responsibility split between management and agile roles.
Yeah,
that's pretty important. And believe it or not, management are actually here to help.
That's what they say, at least, right?
Yeah. We've heard.
Yeah.
Oh, so this is a Scrum Master.
This is a Scrum Master, and she's doing something. I think she might be converting hours into story points. So one of the next things that happen when you go agile is that some manager or a consultant takes all the people who are project managers, they put them in a room, and then they ask, do you like people or do you like products? Right? The ones that like products, they become product owners. The ones that like people, or the ones who think they like people, they become Scrum Masters. Right? And what's the first thing a Scrum Master does?
Yeah. As the start of our Scrum journey, we'll kick off today with this new morning meeting called Daily Scrum. John, why don't you start?
Okay, so as our sprint goal is to create a service for retrieving historical data, I'm setting up a microservice template, but I'm stuck because...
Wait. I would like you to share how many hours you spent on that story so far and how many hours are remaining.
I don't think we're supposed to...
Don't worry, as long as we're standing up, we're doing it right. Yeah, well, if I was a Scrum Master, luckily I'm not, I would think that counting hours would be a good way to find out how much we've done.
Well, it only tells how much time you spent, right? It doesn't tell whether there's progress in the value add, whether you actually delivered something useful to the customer. And second of all, the daily Scrum is not the meeting for doing that, right? The purpose of the daily Scrum is to inspect the plan that we made for the sprint. Is there something that we need to change? Are there some impediments keeping us from working towards the sprint goal? If you want to have budget meetings and status meeting and reporting meetings, do it in one of the other meetings that you haven't removed yet, right? So here's another manager talking to a Scrum Master. Congrats with your new Scrum Master certification, Mikkel. How's it going with your
Thank you.
team?
Pretty good, actually. Even though we never have a sprint goal, the product owner doesn't want sprint reviews, and the developers hate doing sprint retrospectives. I really feel that we're getting into the agile spirit.
So, what are you doing?
We agreed to call it kanban.
Yeah.
And kanban, that is some sort of agile thing, right? But without all the ceremonies and all that.
Well, not exactly, right? So what we see is that many teams, they change the way of working into Kanban because it's easier, right? Because we can't lock down our scope for 2 weeks. It's really difficult with all the Scrum stuff. Let's just do Kanban. But actually, Kanban requires often a higher level of maturity and agility than Scrum requires, right? So it's all about pulling when you have capacity available in Kanban and creating a flow, right? So if you need that, if you need to be able to change your priorities constantly, for instance, if you're doing a lot of operations, then Kanban could be a correct approach to use for you, right? A beneficial approach, but don't do it just because Scrum is difficult. Look into why Scrum is difficult for you. Maybe because there isn't a clear prioritization. No one wants to take responsibility of what to actually work on, what to focus on, and start attacking those issues instead of just moving into Canada.
Also, it really seems that this Scrum Master role is it's pretty hard.
Yes. So this is the ideal Scrum Master we want, right? Someone who's been to war, right? This is what this team needs. Someone who's tried it before, different places, who can shield, protect, coach, improve the team. But what is it that management hires?
Yeah, management hires this one, right? The junior, straight out of university, no experience whatsoever. They think it's just sort of the master of ceremonies, right?
Yeah, so our point here is that the Scrum Master role is not an entry-level role. It's actually a senior people role, right? It's a person who will need to facilitate and coach and mentor and teach and change the company and the organization. And the Scrum Master services not just the developers, but also the product owner and the organization. How can you do that as an entry-level person, right? It's a senior role, so please start taking it seriously. Invest in it.
So how can we help our Scrum Masters? Educate your organization on the different stances of Scrum Masters.
Just like I just mentioned, many companies in Denmark, at least, actually believe that it's just a facilitator. It's so much more than that, right?
And urge the Scrum Masters to look beyond their own team, not just within the team, but outside it, to try to manage all these dependencies.
Yep.
And then empower your Scrum Master to remove systemic and organizational impediments.
Yeah, maybe for instance, it could be that you don't have specific competencies in a team, but they have it in the other corner of the company, right? So invest in getting those competencies built up in your own team instead of just mapping a dependency to the other team.
So another role that we meet in this agile setup, that's a product owner. But this product owner really doesn't look very happy, right?
And that's because he doesn't have a product and he doesn't have any ownership.
No.
So we meet many of those. So here's a happy Scrum Master, right? Because what she's saying is, it's so great to have someone from the business take up the PO role.
Yeah, I'm also really happy to get closer to you guys. It's all about bridging the gap between business and you engineers so we can become one team.
Great, let's get started. And the developer says, I have a question. Should we prepare our backend for future vertical scaling, or should our focus rather be on normalizing the data for improving the performance? Yeah, and we're missing some non-functional requirements.
But what the PO really hears is this. He doesn't understand anything about what these guys are saying. But, well, I don't understand what the developers are saying most of the time. They're just doing their coding stuff and all that. So what's the problem here?
Yeah, the problem is that that coding stuff is actually what adds value to the real people out there, right? That's what actually makes a difference in real life. So what we want is for product owners and developers to get better at communicating with each other. A consequence of this, that they miscommunicate, is that, for instance, enablers, technical debt removal, architectural, new architecture, refactoring of the code, stuff like that, will never be prioritized if the developers cannot communicate in business terms what the implications are of having that to the product owner, right? So we want the developers and the product owners to start sharing a common language. Don't just talk technique. And that's very much easier said than done. Another problem or challenge could be about empowerment, right? So here we have a developer talking to a product owner.
It seems that we can only deliver one of the two stories we expected this sprint. So should we just follow the backlog priority and take the top one?
Let me get back to you on that. Then the PO goes to his boss and says, should we prioritize this story or that story?
Let me get back to you on that. And I'm going to my boss, the CEO. Should we prioritize this story or that story?
And I'm in the top, so I'm saying, what's the story?
No, please just take the next one in the backlog.
Okay, how come?
Let me get back to you on that. So what if the PO needs to ask a couple of colleagues? It is his job, right, to manage the stakeholders and ask around.
It is, but there's a big difference between managing stakeholders and taking decisions, right? So the product owner should ideally be some sort of CIO, CEO of the product. And I know in big enterprises, it's difficult to do it like that. But let's reduce the number of people that the PO needs to talk to before taking a decision. It's going to impede the flow, and an empowered product owner is the most important thing if you want to enable agility. If the product owner cannot take decisions based on customer feedback and user input and all that, they are not very agile.
No. Speaking about aligning with stakeholders. So could you add a view of the historical performance to the application this customer asked the product owner?
And that's a great suggestion. Let me talk to my immediate internal stakeholder group and get back to you. Yeah.
So it looks like he's got a lot of stakeholders, this product owner.
He's got a whole galactic senate, it seems, right? And this is how it can feel. And I try to be a product owner as well, and especially in the scale setup. You have so many people potentially to talk to, right? So let's try to categorize them into who are actually the most important ones, or who just need to be informed and all this. You can do like a stakeholder matrix exercise on this, but let's reduce it.
I'm thinking the most important stakeholder should be the end user.
That's right? Because you're a UX, right?
Yeah. I love the end users, right? So it should be pretty easy for the developer just to reach out to the end user and grab hold of him. But in reality, this is how it looks like, right? There's a long path to the end user. And I'm even there as a sort of a gatekeeper, pretty far away from the end user, actually.
Everyone between the developer and the end user are potentially waste.
No,
that's even me. I'm not even on here,
no.
Right? So why is it so difficult? So let's look into creating environments where the developers just talk to the end users. This is also what we in the lean terms called the Gemba. So where things actually happen, let's get the developers out there where the value is actually consumed. The value that they create, it is actually consumed. Why do we need all of these people in between? And sometimes the developers are actually afraid of talking to end users. But trust us when we say that the end users are more afraid of talking to the developers.
So maybe the actual problem is something else.
What is that?
This pretty boat, right? Oh, this is nice, right? All those fancy features on top, projectors and radars and antennas, and even a happy product owner setting that direction and gazing into the horizon. So I'm thinking we're fine here, right?
Well, this could, it's going to sink eventually, right? And I know there are a lot of applications out there in the world that are going to sink in just a couple of days. So this is a symptom of delivering, or at least focusing too much solely on the business requirements and not having built in enough quality and technical foundational work, because someone only wants to pay for the business stuff, right? So we can of course try to kind of hide it in the estimate, but what we could also do is explicitly work with enablers. So enablers are like features, something that you need to do in order to deliver your future features, right? It could be refactoring your architecture, right? Or changing a framework, or it could be establishing a CI/CD pipeline, whatever you need to do. Foundational work that doesn't directly give you a business benefit, but eventually will speed up things and improve your non-functional requirements. So let's start having the talk between developers and product owners and management and stakeholders on what this enabler stuff really is.
And let's see if we can also maybe help the product owners as well. So educate the non-technical product owners on the consequences of technical debt, just as we saw here, right?
Yeah.
Urge the developers to speak to end users again, as we showed. It should be pretty simple actually. And Luxshan lied. End users love talking to developers and actually also explaining their problems. People want to be heard, right? And let the PO be the only CEO of the product. He should have this empowerment to take decisions on behalf of the product.
Let's move on to the next topic here.
So this is scaling.
This
right?
is scaling, right? Let's just jump into it. So here's an internal agile coach, and I'm an internal agile coach. So I've felt this stuff here. Based on my observations, he says, interviews and metadata from deployment pipelines from numerous teams, I strongly suggest that we invest in removing our dependencies to accelerate our team's delivery of value, the management says.
You're too ideological. That might work in theory, but come on, this is real life.
And here comes the external agile coach. You have many dependencies. You need a scaling framework.
Take our money.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a question of how expensive you are to the organization, and then your thoughts have a higher weight, right?
Before we start scaling, let's look into what the actual reason is that we need to scale. Often it's about dependencies, but what have we done to remove the dependencies before investing in the overhead of managing them, which scaling frameworks basically are. Managing dependencies and getting enterprise level agility, but still not removing the root cause necessarily.
Let's talk about dependencies, right? So PI planning is really great. It gets all the teams together and we'll be able to map dependencies between the teams on a program board.
And here manager comes, hi, how's the planning going?
Pretty good. It's so great to align all the dependencies. We've been needing this overview for ages. That doesn't look like an overview, right? It's pretty busy and they've got dependencies everywhere. So it seems like these guys, they might have a problem.
They might. They have several problems, right? They have dependencies to the plant, even to the dustbin. So this is back to the root cause. Why do we have so many dependencies? And what we see from one program increment to another is that the number of dependencies are actually typically being reduced, right? So what work is done there? Maybe you can do that even more, right? Focus on removing the number of red lines, and then we see actual dependencies become external instead, and we can attack that, why that is. But don't just map dependencies, use it to actively remove them.
So another scaling tool that we have is a collective backlog, right? So a big backlog with the features, and every team is able to pick from that backlog, right?
Yeah, so that's the ideal, right? That you can, across the agile release train, wherever you need to work, wherever you need to invest in the product, we can swarm around that, ideally, right? With feature teams within the agile release train. But reality, it turns out to look something like that, right? One team can only work on one product. So the question is, why even have a common backlog if one team can only work on one product? There's not much agility here. If you want to invest a lot of time in the purple product, and you only have team A with the competencies, how's the cadence going to change, right? So have a think about this, whether you need feature teams across your agile release train or across your value stream. That'll increase your agility if you do that. And what is this, Mikkel?
This is product owners in a safe setup, right? And
it could be,
but they don't look like they own much, and they don't look like they are pretty empowered.
So this is of course like the worst case if you like really do it the wrong way. So I try to be a product owner in this setup, right? And then you have a product manager on top. It doesn't even have to be safe. It can be whatever hierarchy you have on top of a product owner. What's the problem here is that the discovery part of the job, which is finding out what new stuff to do, if you remove that from the product owner, then they're going to be very demotivated, and you're going to inhibit the actual value add of the product. And you're going to inhibit the empiricism, the ability to get feedback from customers and do the right thing, because all the requirements come from some sort of high-level product manager or some sort of requirement sheet or some sort of high-level epic that is way too detailed than it should have been, right?
So another thing that we see in these setups, the release train, right? This is how it looks. 2,000 tons of metal on wheels, just going straight to the horizon. I can't think of a worse metaphor than actually a train to be agile.
That's right. So the problem is actually not the train here, right? The problem is that you have tracks all the way into the horizon. You have the rails all the way into the horizon, and the opportunities you see to the left and to the right, you can't really navigate to them and take them. So what we want, of course, is to not commit to a roadmap that goes all the way into the horizon for a whole year. Only commit for the next program increment, right? And have a forecast on what the rest of the year might look like. Just don't commit to everything to begin with, because then why even run Agile if you can actually deliver and predict what you need to deliver? Do something else. There's so much overhead in Agile. Just do it with whatever waterfall approach you can take if you can predict your market. So we also have the case of multiple Agile release trains, right, that need to coordinate. So here's an SBC talking. So you guys, and he's talking to some release train engineers, you guys have managed to remove the dependencies between the teams in your respective arts, but you still have some dependencies between your art. So to better be aligned and manage these dependencies effectively, let's think of ourselves as a solution train going forward.
Sure, let's try it.
And the manager says, the product manager says,
we'd like you guys to work on this feature next PI so we can piggyback on it in another feature.
And then the other product manager says, sorry, we can't do that. We already refined and distributed all the features for the next PI a month ago.
But come on, there must be limits to how many dependencies you can remove or manage. And what is a solution train anyhow?
Well, it's basically a construct to align different Agile release trains that are going on. But the problem is that if you already done all your refinement and analysis and dependency mapping before PI planning, then you potentially locked too much down. So there's no value in actually meeting and coordinating together at PI planning, right? So have like a sense of how much capacity you have and don't load it fully. Just have an idea of the dependencies you have and only wait to lock them down at the event, right? Don't take a waterfall approach to PI planning.
So how can we help our scaled Agile setup? So focus on removing dependencies between teams through knowledge sharing or collective environment or shared CI/CD pipeline. Understand the importance of aligning the architectural runway with your PI roadmap.
Yes, so just as we saw the railways into the horizon, it could be a technical roadmap as well. Make an emerging architecture.
And then always continuously assess whether the benefits of scaling still outweigh the overhead of scaling.
Yeah, so all the overhead we have, release train engineer, PI planning, product manager, all of this stuff, system architect, have a think at inspect and adapt every PI, whether you still need all of that, just like you should when you have retrospective in the Scrum. In Scrum, think about whether Scrum is the right thing. Think about whether Safe or Less or Nexus or whatever you use is still the right thing for you. So what is it we want to avoid, Mikkel?
Yeah, we want to avoid this picture, right? We took the organizational hierarchy of Agile Sparks and mapped it really. And then if you zoom in a little bit here, you can see there's something not connected to anything. Yeah, oh yeah, you see, right in the middle. It's a blissful Agile island. At that island, everyone is happy. They've got pair programming and Scrum pokers, and they just love it. And please don't bother these guys. They're happy where they are.
And this is what we see in the industry, right? We see, especially in enterprises where you don't only make software, but actually integrated systems consisting of hardware and mechanics and whatnot. It's always in the digital part, in the software part, where they're in front of the Agile movement, right? So what we want instead is to create something across the organization. A product typically spans across software and other departments. Make an Agile pilot across your company, not just within the easy part, which is the software digital department, right?
So let's sum up. The key to a successful Agile transformation is articulating what goes wrong.
And we do that, and then we want you to do more of that as well. Don't just talk about the success stories.
No. And motivate your developers to make the Agile journey pragmatic and relevant.
Some developers might say, oh, I don't want all this agile process stuff. It's really boring. But they can actually make it relevant by, for instance, driving pair programming or mob programming, stuff that's actually fun, innovation Fridays and whatnot.
Make them understand why we're really doing this.
It will give them fewer meetings, right?
And they love that. And a successful agile transformation means fewer meetings, more time for coding, and happier end users.
Who doesn't want that?
And here's when we say that you will make mistakes, right? But talk about them and laugh about them, and then we can learn from them.
I hope you had a bit of a laugh and reflection based on our presentation, and thank you for your attention.